discuss what we've thought of disobedience, what we've thought of transgression, what we've thought about women writing in general. So we've already got some questions, and in the interest of time, let's take the questions one by one. We're going to start with you, Eleni. But before that, thank you so much for being with us at this really ungodly hour. I just want everyone to know that this is 6 in the morning for Eleni, probably 6:45 now. And we're just so thrilled to have you on board. So, Eleni, this question is for you. When did you realize that strongly feminist poetry was your calling?
I don't know. I think it just was. I don't think that there was a moment of revelation, except there was a moment of revelation that that's the kind of work I kept being drawn to, and certainly even just that the poets that I love to read tended to be women. There are men whose work I love as well, but that's where I tended to read. So I don't know. One thing I would say is that when I was a child, because I was born in 1965, and anyone who was doing anything interesting was a man. If you wanted to learn how to fly a plane, if you wanted to be a novelist, if you wanted to be a poet, all I saw were men. And I had the feeling when I was a girl that I was going to grow up to be a boy. That's because I wanted to do something interesting. It just in my mind, it wasn't even a conscious thing, but I pictured myself as a boy. So I think in order to inhabit that capacity to do what I wanted to do, reading and being engaged in feminist work was the way to do that.
Thank you, Eleni. I'm going to move on to Tiffany, and this is almost like a follow-up question to the previous one, Tiffany. And our audience wants to know, did you start with gentle poetry initially, and then did you move on to a more fiery feminist style? When did you adopt this style of feminist poetry?
Right, did I start with gentle poetry? Gosh, what's a good question. I started with fairly autobiographical poetry, and that I think that's where a lot of people start. And then as I read more, I think I learned that I think as we were discussing in the panel, that disobedience isn't just a matter of or feminism isn't just a matter of describing experience, but it's your whole relationship to the signifiers available, isn't it? And sort of what Eleni was saying as well is that the models were all male, and so what happens if you think about trying to find different ones? So I began to read much more for that. The point at which, and I'm not even entirely sure that my writing has matured in that way. I hope it does eventually, but I think it was very much a process of reading and having my eyes open to what was possible, and that you could go much further than describing experience or documenting experience, or indeed trying to transform experience. I mean, this isn't a negative statement about autobiographical or confessional writing. But I think as I learned more about technique and form, that's where I found it much more interesting to push at those boundaries. But that's a long journey. I mean, I think I've probably only just started that.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'm going to move on to Natalie. And this is very interesting. And I know you've talked about this while we were discussing the idea of disobedience and male gaze. Just a follow-up question on that. Was there any opposition when you started writing? Were you appreciated by women when you started focusing on the issue of feminism?
These are great questions, actually. And yeah, I do find that a lot of, especially when I do work with younger people, it's often young women who reach out and want to share their poetry and feel comfortable to be able to do that. And I think it's important as well to create that sort of safe space. I don't really know what else to say, because I do get males as well that will share their work, but I think it's about having spaces to write and feel that you're welcome in that circle to be able to do that. Yeah, don't know what else. That's quite difficult. It's about creating trust.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, having that kind of trust and that space, it's very necessary. I'm going to quickly move on to Nurduran. This is a question that we got on our Facebook, and this is in reference to Nurduran, what you said on the panel about not too many Turkish female poets wanting to be publishers. You see a lot of them that are writing, and you see a lot of them that are editors, but not too many of them in sort of these directorial publishing roles. So the question is from Nabonita, one of our, she's in the audience, and she asked, is it that women don't like, or are they unable to get to head these publishing houses for various reasons?
Yeah, in fact, there are many owners, women owners of publishing companies, and also we have really good, famous, hardworking, and respectable women directors also. But I see, yeah, we are able to. But I think my colleagues decide not to be there because they want more time, and they don't want power. I think they want to do more creative things. I think that is that.
I am now going to take a question. This came to us on Twitter, and this is actually from someone who's on our curatorial team, Rochelle. We're a big fan of her writing as well. So Rochelle has written to us, feminism has varied definitions depending on the women's navigation through patriarchy and misogyny. I have observed sisterhood too is frayed and exclusionary. That is betrayal, in my opinion. How can women get better with other women in this march and journey? And I think it's a very sort of significant question for all of us, because how often are women willing to believe other women? How often are women willing to stand by other women? And why, you know, what are these forces that always necessarily pit one woman against another? I think we can do a quick round if all of you would consider responding to this. We could begin with Eleni on my screen.
Maybe, actually, let me think about this a little bit longer, Sumrita, and maybe somebody else wants to respond. Yeah.
For sure. Tiffany, I see you next on my screen. Would you like to talk about this a little? Women's solidarity.
I'll have a go. Yeah, it's a really difficult issue, isn't it? I mean, generally, not just in relation to writing. And I think really we're talking about intersectionality to an extent, aren't we? And how the category of woman, you know, it hypothetically is a point of connection, but in practice, very often not. And this is a huge question. I mean, answering it from the point of view of a writer, you know, what is our job as writers? I would say reading a lot, reading across cultures in different languages, thanks to translators like you. I mean, I am pretty much a monoglot, so I rely very heavily on translation. And being open to conversations where the agendas are put aside. I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? That with any ethical movement, which I think feminism is a tendency, we're all quite tempted to take the high ground, aren't we? It's quite nice to have a moral high ground, and I think this goes between, this also applies to conversations between genders as well as between women, but I think there needs to be a kind of an openness, a porousness, a willingness to be awkward and embarrassed, and to have difficult conversations, so that we don't all retreat into these senses of having a right and a wrong position, perhaps. But how writing plays into that, I think, is a big question. But I have a hunch it's to do with everyone making the effort to read more widely, to understand different ways of what it means to be a woman, perhaps. Thank
you very much for that, Tiffany, because I know I said we're going to do one round of this, but we have a very similar and related question to what Tiffany has just said, and I'm going to throw it out here. This is from Priya, and she wants to know, do you think there are enough readers of feminist poetry? Because women poets have a hard time getting published anyway. So do you think if you write about feminism in particular, getting published is that much more difficult? Natalie, would you take that, please?
I think that there's been a lot more effort in the past few years to give that a platform. And I'm noticing a lot more men engaging with that sort of poetry, a lot more men sharing it on different platforms or getting featured, or women being celebrated. And I think that's an effort we need to keep on with. And it's a point I've made before about having diversity at festivals, giving women voices as well, and for men to listen to us as well. I mean, it's all well just giving women publishing opportunities, but we need people to be reading it, and we need a range of people to be reading it as well. And the point about whether it's easier for feminist poets to get published, again, I've not found it as much of a problem. Perhaps I've come into this a lot later. If you'd asked me, say, like if I'd been an older writer and I'd published something maybe 20 years ago, it might have been a very different story. I think we need to just don't slack on that work and to keep doing it and get to a point where we sort of take away gender as even a deciding factor when it comes to reading or publishing anyone.
Thank you, Natalie. Nurduran, I think Natalie's highlighted a very important point that, you know, for some of us, it's easier because many people have come before us and made our path easier. It's not something that happened organically. And so Natalie and I might not necessarily find it so difficult to get our work out there, but have you, Nurduran, faced something similar? Has it been difficult for you to find publishers as a female poet? And also, if you were writing feminist poetry, has it been difficult for you to get that out there?
Yeah, I think I see. I didn't have any difficulties, but I know our old generations had. Women are published here equally, no problem. But men poets are more than women poets. I think it is because of the social and economical situation of the women in society at the moment. Now, women are free; they earn their own money. They are in the social life, so they are in the poetry life also. So we have no problems at the moment. But in the past, we had. I see that publishing has no difficulties. Even you can be selected to the syndicates board. You can be board members. I was in before. You can be even president. No problem. But I see that the competition juries have more men than women. But I think it is not because of differences between men or women. It is it is related to the amount of the women poets in the society. Now we are in the juries, maybe 3 men, 2 women, 4 men, 1 woman, but we are in the juries. I believe that next generation, maybe we will have more women in the competition juries, because our next generation, I see that more women poets in that generation, and they are coming really strong. And I believe that we owe to old generation and also Mustafa Kemal Atatürk because of the Republic. Thank you.
Thank you, Nurduran. We will go back to Eleni now on the same question, Eleni. Has the path been thorny for you? And also, what do you make of this idea of the lack of solidarity among certain women?
Yeah, I certainly I don't experience that personally. I actually feel very supported by and encouraged by my fellow women poets. I mean, I do always think, because I think actually I'm in a generation of American poets where the women, to me, were doing the most interesting work, and I think were getting published and so forth. But I also keep coming back to the fact that there's very little money and power in poetry to begin with. So it's not as contested an area in that sense. It's a place where women can be published and have quote unquote power in this powerless sphere. I guess I feel like I'm always trying to do my best and remind myself, you know, and from the panel, you might remember Tiffany's comment about being at somebody's house, a friend's house, and noticing that there are only men on the bookshelves. And I love that, Tiffany, that you said something about that and asked a question. So I'm always trying to do that. And for example, on this jury that I'm on, this panel, trying to make sure that I advocate for the women to get to grants as well. But I do, for example, the last poetry class I taught this spring, I only taught women, books by women. And you know what was interesting? The students didn't even notice that I wasn't teaching a single man. And I never mentioned it. So just trying to inscribe it in these various ways. There is obviously so much work to be done. I don't know if you guys are following American news, but you might know that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was just called, I don't know if we're allowed to say what she's called here at the festival, but yeah, she was called by a
You're allowed. You're allowed.
A fucking bitch. And it's just, yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable that that is happening at the sphere that they're at. So clearly we have to keep doing the work. I do think, you know, there has been a backlash against feminism here in this country, and I'm sure that that happens everywhere, and we have to keep being brave. And I guess for me, it's not really, it's a fabric of everything. It's not like a separate thing from my being. It's what I believe in. And I'm not always going to have to be militant, or, you know, I don't think of myself as militant. And there are times when it's not what's foremost on my mind, but it is always there as a fabric of my being. And I'm always reminding myself of what's right, because the culture at large is always telling me something different. So I think we have to keep inscribing that for ourselves as well, and proceeding with our fellow poets, women, children, in an ethical way.
Thank you, Eleni. In the interest of time, I know there are more questions coming in, but we have another session up in a couple of minutes as soon as we wrap this up. So what I can promise to do is forward some of your questions to our panelists, and I can try and get these answers out to you, because, you know, it's not that we have the answers to everything, but I think we have to keep the dialogue going. So thank you so much for bringing up that point, Eleni. I mean, you know, when I was a student, I would hear some of these student leaders and they would say this to me all the time, and I'll say it in Hindi first. Abhi to li angrai hai, aage aur larai hai. You know, we've just started out and we have miles to go before we sleep. So we're on the road. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a smooth, organic journey. It's never been for women, and it's never been that way for gender minorities. Intersectional feminism is the way forward, and let's try in our own little ways to brighten the little corners that we have, that we live in. So thank you so much, Eleni, Tiffany, Natalie, Nurduran, for being with us today, for the panel discussion, for the readings, and thank you to the audience for your questions, for watching this. We understand that you're spending too much time on screen. Some of us are feeling burnt out, but we really appreciate your support. And obviously, I need to thank Jija and Yumna for giving us this platform. Yumna is the director of the festival. Art Mantram, you're doing a great work for writers, especially in these times. And we're happy to help you and support you in any way possible. Over to you, Yumna.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining. I appreciate the discussion. I wish we could keep it going. It's always, I think, how I'm feeling these days, that I wish we were in sort of stretchable time like Dali's clocks that would just melt on, and we could all just be together at the same time. Thank you for joining, Eleni. Thank you for waking up at an hour that I know is way too early for you, and being here. I think it's been very meaningful. In fact, I've been hearing on various other chat groups how much they've been enjoying this particular session, the festival in general, of course. I hope you have the opportunity to catch some of the other sessions, because they've really been good. And Nurduran, thank you for joining us. Natalie, Tiffany, thank you for coming in. Somrita is a wonderful part of our curatorial team. Thank you, Somrita. And for everybody else, the agenda continues. So bye, guys. See you. Everybody else, see you back on our screening site. So see you there.